pull the trigger, pull the trigger, pull the trigger. He didn't do it just once. He said, pull the trigger, pull the trigger, pull the trigger. Because the more you do it, the more the expression comes out of him, comes out of actors, characters, the more the audience is going to feel it. Happy birthday to everybody celebrating March birthday, and also to the rest. Happy spring to everyone. And the Oscar goes to the brilliant storyteller, lawyer, John Meadors. That's where the guns were, because the guns disappeared from the property. The guns disappeared from the property. This is Mihaela with Art of Experiencing, celebrating my birthday. And I feel a little bit nostalgic about it. Your celebration of the birthday, even though you're grateful to still be alive, which I am grateful to still be alive, and I am grateful for so many other things, but at the same time, I was just thinking about my grandmother who raised me from Romania when I was a child, and she passed at the age of 2 years older than I am right now. So even though as a child, I wasn't understanding how young she was. I mean, I really was, but I wasn't. Now, being 2 years away from the time that she passed makes me understand how young she was when she passed. So I'm a little bit nostalgic and a little bit sad, but grateful at the same time, because it's so easy to let ourselves go to the negative thoughts that can bring us down, but then you have to make a conscious decision to go to the positive and remind yourself of all the grace that you have in your life, or I have in my life. Today's episode is going to be such a perfect example of what acting greatly is, and not the misunderstood acting, which majority of the people still seem to make mistakes about, believing that they're putting a show on, they're being theatrical, they're being fake, they're being insincere. That's all wrong. Great acting, which could be not just referring to the actors, but act as an action, as doing something, as an active participant into something. Act greatly. That's what I was witnessing while watching the trial, the Murdaugh trial. Closing arguments. Most importantly, we're going to focus on the rebuttal of the closing argument from the prosecution, and more specifically, of the exceptional storyteller, lawyer, John Meadors. I believe that's his pronunciation of the last name. If it's not, then I apologize, because I know the importance of people trying to get one's name correctly. We're going to look at his closing, and we're going to go through it. We're going to break down the entire closing to show you how he consciously, subconsciously, I don't know if you worked with an acting coach. I know a lot of lawyers who work with acting coaches, as they should. The smart ones work with acting coaches to be able to tell a story to the audiences, to the jurors in their cases, because ultimately all the evidence, circumstantial, direct evidence, of course it does matter, but at the end, the way that you're going to win the case, the way that you are going to win the jurors to see your side, is due to the way that you tell your side of the story. I will tell you, in my opinion, what I think that he was using from the actor's manual, from the actor's tools. I think what's so extraordinary about his opening, the introduction, imagine him as a character. Imagine him to be an actor playing this character of the prosecutor, doing the rebuttal of the closing argument for the state. Unlike the other lawyers, the defense lawyers, and the other lawyers on his team, Mr. Creighton Waters, who also did an okay job, this amazing lawyer gets up, doesn't have a piece of paper that he's going to read from, because if you do have a piece of paper that you're going to read from, the same way that the defense attorney for Alex Murdaugh, Jim Griffin, had, that will be making it more difficult for you to be able to embody the story. the paper in front of you and you having to shuffle through the pages of it is going to keep you from allowing yourself to be able to involve your whole instrument, the whole instrument being, in this case, Mr. John, physicality, emotional, his mind, body, and soul, giving himself the permission, saying to himself, I have done enough of the preparation during the 6 weeks of this trial. I've done the work the same way that an actor would have to do. I've memorized the lines. I know the work. I've done the script analysis. I've realized all of the ins and outs of what this case is about, the same way that an actor would do. Now I'm ready to say to myself, trust yourself, let it go. You don't need to have the script in front of you. You don't need to have the paper in front of you. You trust yourself enough to leave yourself alone to be a human being and put yourself in front of an audience, in this case, to put yourself on stage, which in this case is the courtroom, and the audience are the jurors. He gets up, humble, takes a moment, as we all do in everyday life, thinks about how he's going to begin, inner thoughts happening, which is what the jurors, the audiences receive to be identical to who they are, because we in everyday life have thoughts, we have inner thoughts. We need a couple of minutes before we actually know what we're going to say. Tries to pace back and forth, which will help him to get rid of any nerves in the body if he's experiencing any nerves in the body, any tension in the body. He walks around as a human being would. So the pacing in the beginning was right on. His physicality was right on. Taking the time to begin was right on. He says, I'm going to paraphrase, I'm not going to quote everything that he says. The description that he gives to the jurors of them to be is the same description I would consider to describe what actors must be, what actors must do. I want to say thank you so much. First of all, he's already creating a dialogue with them, even though he knows they're not going to respond. The monologue, which is him speaking alone, doesn't remain a monologue, which most bad actors and lawyers would do. They would know that the jurors have no right to respond. Therefore, they are just going to go on in a monologue kind of way. A great actor, a great lawyer, as he is, looks at the audience, gives them the space. Thank you so much. He waits. I know you cannot respond. This is his subtext, giving you the chance in your mind to be able to respond to what I'm saying. So he's giving them the opportunity to respond, even though they do not voice it. Probably saying, what a wonderful man to appreciate our work so much. So you're giving them a chance to become part of this dialogue that you're beginning. And then he says to them, what do jurors have to know? The service of the jurors, I've done it once or twice since I've become an American citizen, and it's like a really proud moment when you're actually selected. You're scared at the same time because you want to have the common sense to come out with the right verdict, but at the same time, when the whole thing is all over, you feel proud that you're able to do some service. It's a very mixed emotional thing that happens with jurors, and I'm sure with them too, because they're human beings. Wouldn't it be nice if there was a manual on how to become a great juror? Wouldn't it be great if we could give you a manual where you have all the directions on how to go about in reviewing this case, this tragic case where two family members were murdered by the defendant right here, the one they trusted the most. They were butchered, they were murdered. Their brains were blown out of their heads, as in the case of the little detective Paul, who actually is the one, because of his video, putting his father at the kennels, will get him the verdict that we're going to come to later. He says, all you have to do, because you don't have a manual, I don't have a manual, not a manual was written for me to be able to give you. So then you have to rely on you being a human being. You have to rely on your common sense. You have to rely on your observation skills from everyday life. You have to rely on your experiences from your everyday life. You have to rely on your relationships, good relationships, bad relationships, great moments in your life, bad moments in your life. You have to rely on your experience of your humanness, of your humanity. You as human beings are enough for you to be able to take this case when you go back and you start to deliberate, to trust yourselves, to bring your life experiences to this case and try to analyze it. It's as if an actor would do a script analysis based on his personal understanding of what the character is, because we cannot divide ourselves from our personal backstory, from our personal experiences, from where we come from. I just was telling you in the beginning of the episode, my birthday today, where does my mind go to? My grandmother, who passed many years ago, whom I miss so much. And that makes me have feelings already that will come up. That personal story of my life, that personal relationship with my grandmother who raised me, will never be outside of me. I cannot come as an actor to a character and say, I'm not going to bring my personal life to the character. I'm only going to use my imagination. That's not possible medically. You can't divide one from the other. The imagination is also built on my personal understanding of life and life experiences. So he's actually giving them a definition of what makes good jurors, which is the same definition, what makes good actors. It's unbelievable. When I saw him opening with that statement, I was glued. Already, anybody who's watching will relate to that, which he just described the jurors to be. Everyone is a human being. Everybody can identify with life experiences, common sense. Who doesn't relate to being a human being? So he already grabbed everybody watching, not only the jurors, the immediate audience in this case, but also the audience watching him on different platforms. That's the opening statement. That's the introduction. That's already the beginning of his arc in telling the story. What's so amazing about what he's doing right now, he's trying to describe to the jurors, the audience, which I'm going to call both jurors and audience, because that's what they are in my analysis. If this was a character interpreted by an actor, all of a sudden he starts to involve his right arm, right? From the beginning statement where he was very casually walking around, we didn't see the next emotion that was going to rise up. Every emotion that he comes to in the description of the narration of the story, he will live himself in the moment. He's not just describing the emotional arc of the storytelling. He will allow himself to be experiencing, going back to life experiences. He will allow himself to be experiencing that which he's feeling when he is telling the story, that which is the response that he has to everything that he's saying right now. He's trying to describe to the audience by going back and taking them back to an analogy of, do you remember in 2017, there was an eclipse, which means that there was a darkness, there was a covering, everything is really dark. He's trying to say that that defense side of the story is trying to blur the juror's vision by bringing up all these truths about their defendant, only to blur and to darken the reality and the clarity of the case. He's already starting to use his right hand when he's walking back and forth, right? He says, do you remember? That's what an actor does. An actor has to imagine in this moment, which he is doing. He's doing so perfectly. You have to imagine what we call the fourth wall. The camera, if it's in front of us, can become the fourth wall, or the audience if we're on a stage. We have to imagine when we are not talking to the audience, when he's not talking to the audience directly, which he was in the beginning, he has to let the audience on the side for a little bit, and then he starts to imagine. So he's imagining the eclipse. That's putting up the fourth wall, meaning I'm going to separate myself for a moment from the audience. So I'm not going to make direct contact. And I'm going to give myself to my imagination and imagine the sun, imagine the moon, imagine the eclipse as if I'm seeing it right now on the sky. I'm seeing it. By him imagining it, by him using the sense of sight, visualizing it, he takes the jurors to see it themselves. If you, the actor, if you, the great actor, are seeing, are creating that which you are seeing, are imagining it to be so vivid in front of you, using your hand as if to move the way the sun and the moon came together for the eclipse, or whatever takes place when an eclipse happens, by moving that hand over the top of the jurors' heads. You know, when a great actor will look all the way at the end of where the audience is in the last row, and he will make that be so believable, the sun and the moon, the eclipse coming together, and the audience will turn because they will be believing what he is imagining. If a great actor imagines something, the audience will imagine. That's what I'm talking about when I'm saying that he's using acting tools. I don't know if he knows that he's using them. Some people instinctually have this understanding of being able to be a great storyteller. In acting also, before Stanislavski came up with a manual. So going back to what he was saying about there's no manual for the jurors, there was no manual for actors for a very long time until Stanislavski came up with a written manual. But still, there were actors, great actors, such as Eleonora Duse, who was just instinctually, organically, authentically knowing how to do all of these things that I'm talking about. She didn't have to go into a book to read direct contact with the audience. Private moment, which means that you leave the audience to the side and you're imagining something that's in front of you. The use of your body to demonstrate that which you are vividly seeing in front of you as if it's there for real. All of those tools that are now in a manual for actors began with Stanislavski's system, then went to method of Strasberg. I'm not sure that he's one to just instinctually know how to do what he's doing, how to use these acting tools, or was he working with an acting coach? I don't know, because I know lawyers work with acting coaches. He's already creating that. I'm leaving you to the side for a moment, no direct interaction with the jurors, with the audience. I'm going to create for you this visual. And he does that. What happens next? He goes to talk about the defense and their arrogance, his anger with them, to fault everyone else in this case, to fault the law enforcement, to fault all the other characters in this saga, to be able to save their defendant, Alex Murdaugh. He doesn't just say it as if any other lawyer would probably just say it. The jurors, they're not going to be attached to what somebody says. Words without the truth of emotion and sincere emotion and expressions underneath them mean absolutely nothing, will not move anyone. So he's allowing himself to be part of how it made him feel to have everybody else blamed, not to assume blame for the defendant, who's the one who's wronged the most. He lied about the most important thing, which was that he was not at the scene of the crime when his wife and his young son, Paul, were murdered. The defendant lied about that. Here is his defense team saying, everybody else lied. Everybody else did everything wrong, when he, the defendant, did the most vile thing by lying to not have been at the crime scene when his son and his wife were murdered. He's putting himself in that situation as if all of this that I'm talking about is happening to him. He's taking it on. He's personalizing the story of Alex Murdaugh, and he's putting it on him, imagining what he would do as a father, what he would do as a husband, if that was the situation, how he would go about it. By him living it, putting himself in the shoes of the defendant, which is what great actors have to do. They have to put themselves in the shoes of the characters, meaning they have to dig deep down inside of themselves and imagine and live and experience as if those circumstances were happening to them. He's doing just that. That's why the jurors are feeling him. His every cell of the body is being involved in the way that he is reliving that what he's saying, as if he were the one this happened to. He's not just telling the story. He's a great story experiencer. He experiences the story. That's what people don't understand. Those experts out there who talk about, oh, it was because he talked about the son, and it was because he talked about the wife being murdered. Everybody else talked about the son. Everybody else talked about the wife being murdered. All of the other lawyers, but nobody came across as moving as he does, because he's living those experiences when talking about the wife, Maggie, and the son, Paul. It's not just telling, it's experiencing. That's why my channel is called Art of Experiencing, because that's the definition of acting. Psychology transformed into behavior, and the craft of acting became known as the art of experiencing when Stanislavski came up with a manual for actors. Let's move on. Unfreaking believable how much this last segment he talks about everything that we in acting talk about. He's talking about the importance of credible characters, credible evidence, believable, credible, believable. That's what great acting is: being credible, being believable. And then he goes on to add more of the acting tools, giving us the distinction between direct evidence and circumstantial evidence. Direct evidence being something that you can see, being something that you can hear, being something that you can smell, being something that you can taste, being something that you can, all of the five senses involved: hearing, smelling, taste, touch, see. That's direct evidence. The five senses in acting are the foundation to every great actor. Our senses are how we respond to the given circumstances, real or fictional. The response we must have as actors have to be credible, believable, and use our senses to make them so. He's bringing the lesson of acting into the courtroom to make his case. He goes back to remind everybody about the opening of Mr. Creighton, the opening statement of the prosecution, his teammate, where he talks about the storm coming. There's a storm coming outside, beginning with the reality of what is. The storm is actually the literal storm, the rain outside, that we could hear the drops of the rain. And then he goes to make it and talk about it metaphorically in this case of the defendant, of Alex Murdaugh, whose lies and whose deceit and whose cunning things that he was doing for so many years to connive and to betray people that he loved the most came to a storm. The storm was coming into his life. The storm was the only metaphorical term that he could come up with. He started with a storm that was forming outside to then go into the metaphoric storm. Do you see the brilliance in using the acting tools? Deal with what is, make the audience hear the storm, the sound. Do you remember we heard the drops of the rain as it started? Create the wall between you and the audience for a second, where you're letting yourself create that moment so they can see it. They can remember it from the opening statement, and you link it to what was forming into the life of this defendant. Brilliant. What does he do? What does he do? He brings his mama, the same way that I brought my grandmother in the beginning of the episode. I'm nostalgic on my birthday today because my grandmother, who I loved so much and raised me, she passed 2 years older than I am right now. So that's a personal sharing of something that every audience member, every juror is going to recognize himself or herself in, because who doesn't have somebody from their personal life, another member of the family, they can recognize in the story that Mr. John, I can't pronounce his last name, that he's telling, personalizing the story of this defendant with this gruesome murder that took place. He's bringing a little bit of understanding of there is kindness in the world. There is kindness, because my mama, when I went away to college, she gave me this book to read, which was about life lessons, about what to do in difficult moments of life. Everybody relates to that. So he's personalizing the story, bringing some kindness from his own backstory. The most important thing that he learned from his mom was be real, always be real, which is another thing that most people misunderstand. They think that acting is being false. They think that acting is being fake, when it's completely the opposite. It requires of you to tap into yourself in the most real way you possibly can, to bring out the sides that you have, which are on the spectrum of humanity, from the most beautiful to the most gruesome. And what this case is about that. It's about this family, this dynasty that goes back a century. And this guy is taking everybody down, disrespecting the law. He's disrespecting people who were suffering. He promised to fight for, as a lawyer, to win money for them so they can survive the most horrible injuries they suffered. Some of them passed on. He took everything, all the money from them. Let's just say he could have taken half. No, he took everything from them. Everything. Disgrace. I don't know how to say it. He brought to this dynasty of a family. Crazy. So the lawyer is saying, my mama told me to be real, when everything else about this guy is the opposite of being real. Dishonest, fake. He's talking about the real versus Alex being unreal, lying. He's going back to recreate what the liar Alex told the jurors by saying he wasn't at the murder scene. When he found his wife and Paul dead, what did he do? What did he do? And he's pointing as he's walking around, but he's still pointing to where he's sitting. The defendant is sitting at the table. What did he do? He didn't call Buster, like he's telling everybody that he was afraid that there were people who came to take vengeance on Paul, or they did not. There must have been other people who came on the property who just assumed that there are going to be guns all over the place, so they don't have to bring their own guns. They're going to be able to find them on the Moselle property. He sees his wife and his child. What does he do? He doesn't call his other son, the only living son, Buster, to say, Buster, who are you with? Call the police. Go to the police station, because this is what happened. I just came back to the Moselle property. Your brother and your mom, they're dead. Stay away. I'm so scared. Are you by yourself? Who are you with? He's involving himself in the description of what happened as if it's happening in the moment, and how he would react. Brings in the real. The real is that the guns, I had to take the guns and I had to take them to my mother's house. But he's not going to tell you that, because he's only telling you that he went to the mother's house to see his mother, because he cannot tell you the real. He's telling you the unreal. He cannot tell you the real, that he took the guns and he put them in a thing, took him to his mother, but he's not going to tell you that. No, he's not going to tell you that. So do you see, he goes from feeling all this emotion that he's allowing himself to feel in the beginning part when he talks about the dishonesty, to what the real is. He's trying to find his other thought. He's thinking about it, the lawyer, because we as actors, even though we know the monologue, when we go to actually do a performance, which this is a performance, we have to imagine that as the characters, we don't know what we're going to say next. That's how you can stay in the moment. That's how you can be moment to moment living as a character, to create for the audience a credible narration, a monologue turned into a dialogue that's going to not only surprise them, but it's going to look like you are surprising yourself in the moment. In the moment to the next moment, almost not knowing what you're going to say, depending on the reaction of the audience. Because you always have to be observant of what the audience is doing. And he was observant. Now listen to me. Now pay attention to me. He responded to what was happening in the moment with the jurors, and he asked for their attention. This was important. Bringing justice is the goal of this whole scenario. Bringing justice to those people, to those two people who have no voice. He took that goal and objective of this closing of the whole trial. He took it upon himself as if it were his own goal and as if his life depended on it. His life depended on it. Because as an actor, when I am going to fight as a character for what the character's goal is, if I do not take that goal to be on me as if my life depends on it, it's not going to move anybody. It will remain a superficial performance. Nobody will understand and nobody will feel anything. A real common sense that he was asking the jurors to consider when analyzing this case and coming back with a verdict. Yeah, they want us to believe that people came on the property without guns because they thought for sure they're going to find those guns there. They're going to come, they're going to find them. He's actually curious and extremely surprised by the dishonesty of that narrative from the side of the defense in the moment, as if he's looking at the jurors to say, do you believe that? That was probably his subtext, that he's not speaking. They want you to believe that. That's what they want you to believe. That's what they want you to believe. That means what he's thinking, but he's not saying. To be, they think you're that stupid. They think you're that stupid as people to believe. That's what they think. This is what I keep talking about actors. If actors do not give all of themselves to be able to create credible, real, believable characters who have emotions, who have experiences in the moment of their performances, stay home. Because the audience is not stupid. The audience is smarter than you think they are. You cannot fool them by being superficial, by lying, by being dishonest. Acting is not about superficiality, dishonesty, and cunning. The same way that the jurors are smart enough to read that this defendant is all of that, acting badly. This lawyer, this prosecutor is completely the opposite. The opposite. Oh my goodness, I feel like I'm in church right now. I feel like I'm in my dad's church. He's preaching. Closing act. And the Oscar goes to Mr. John Meadors. He used repetition exercises. Repetition exercise is a tool. Pull the trigger, pull the trigger. Then he looks at the lady in the jury. And then he looks at the man, sir, dear ma'am. Malice, gruesome, killing. 2 bullets in Paul, 5 bullets in Maggie. And then, Baba. Let's not forget Baba, the dog with the chicken who Alex could tell you more about than he could tell you about the last conversation that he had with his wife and child. In the storm that was coming to turn his world upside down, probably looked at his son, Paul, and thought, you and your boat accidentally killed one of the young, beautiful girls on that boat, one of his friends. You made all this world of mine to collapse. You made all this world of mine to be disturbed because of your accident. Maybe he was angry at his son, Paul. In his mind, he felt that he brought this storm that was forming onto Alex, because he cannot take responsibility for himself to say, no, all the stealing that I've done, all the people that I've hurt, I brought it all onto myself. All the drugs that they say he took, I still don't believe the amount of drugs, but I don't want to get into that. Paranoid, the way that he even said that he was paranoid to lie to the police, but then he's not paranoid to get angry and kill his son and his wife when she was a witness to the murder of the son. Not only 1 bullet, ladies and gentlemen, 2 bullets into the son, Paul, 5 bullets into the wife, Maggie. Baba, Baba, do not forget about Baba. Let's go to Baba, Baba. So what he does, he's talking as if the dog is right there. He's looking to the side, down to the ground where Baba would be. So he's talking to Baba, Baba. So he's not just describing, oh, and then Baba. No, he is recreating the experience he's imagining Alex did by taking into consideration his lies and then also turning those lies into what the reality must have been. Baba, Baba, Baba. He looks at Baba, calls the dog. What was also so wonderful that he did is, again, he's making use of, I'm seeing you, the audience. Guess what? I'm thirsty. I'm going to borrow this water, which I think the water was placed on in front of where the jurors were. So he's putting himself in the same shoes of the audiences as to say, I understand you. I'm not going to go to the table where my team is, the legal team, because I'm a human being just like you are, making himself be relatable to the jurors. I'm just going to borrow this water. So he takes water from there where they were sitting rather than taking it from the legal team next to him, which was really good. That's a wonderful way of using a prop when you're actually acknowledging the fact that you're thirsty. Any human being who talks for as long as he does, knowing the consequences of what the outcome verdict is going to be are so high, of course he's going to be thirsty. So he's admitting to his humanity. The use of the prop makes sense. But if somebody just takes a water and they're drinking the water, they're not acknowledging what he did. I'm thirsty. Subtext, because there's so much depending on my closing, and I want you all to understand the importance of you coming back with guilty or not guilty and the difference between the two, that the prop makes sense. So that was beautiful too. And then he looks at the judge and then he turns to the judge. So he's using the entire space of this court as if it were a stage. He's using the immediate jurors. He's using the defendant. He's making dialogue with the jurors, knowing they cannot answer, but he's making them have questions for themselves. Use of the entire stage, which in this case is the court. He's leaving it all on the stage. Yes, he is. Leave it all on the stage. I just hope that you guys can make sense of what I'm saying, because I'm so excited just by watching it now. Every beat that I'm watching, even though I saw it when it was happening, I'm just realizing there's so much more to it. Example of the craft of art of experiencing that can be used by any professionals in any field. Lawyers, doctors, entrepreneurs, businessmen, mechanics, nurses, teachers, people, every day, in everyday life. It is so helpful for anybody to be able to then become better observer of your relationships, understanding when somebody's lying, understanding when somebody's being real, understanding when someone is credible, understanding when someone is not credible. So it helps you navigate life so much better. The manual that doesn't exist for jurors, the manual that doesn't exist for life, the manual that exists is the one for actors. And I think the manual for actors can be used for jurors, it can be used for lawyers, it can be used for everyday people in everyday life. It can be used by all. Thank God we have such a manual for actors with such amazing tools that when presented in this case will bring the verdict. That's what I believe. In my opinion, I believe the closing act, being that it was a closing act, you know how every closing act is the last one. So everyone before the closing act is considered to be okay, good, and the closing act is great because you want the audience to be left with the last closing act. That's what's going to move you. That's what's going to be what you were thinking of when you went back into the room to start deliberating and come up with a guilty or not guilty verdict. Brilliant on the part of whomever chose this gentleman to do the closing act. I don't think anybody else could have done the justice that he did to this case, to bringing justice. Now he's reliving and re-experiencing the whole situation with Miss Shelley, nurse that was taking care of Alex's mother. She was testifying on the behalf of the prosecution, and she was so honest in her testifying. But what he does so wonderfully, not only does he remind the jurors what Miss Shelley testifies, but he's recreating her body language as if she's now again there, She's there where the microphone is. He gets up and he goes, do you remember the whole situation, do you remember the situation with Miss Shelley when she came to testify? He's trying to remember as if it's happening. Do you remember? And she was sitting right there she was sitting. Do you remember where she was sitting? The body language of anybody is so important. Do you remember the body language of Miss Shelley? She was like this. Body language is very important. So he's aware the body language is very important when he's speaking about another person. Therefore, he knows himself to use body language because he's aware of it. And then Miss Shelley was very disturbed that she saw Alex Murdaugh come over to the house. She didn't understand why he would come at this time of night because he never comes at this time of night. But she saw him carrying a blue thing, and he's making the prop as if it's real in his arms. He's even feeling the weight of it. Even great actors, sometimes they will recreate a prop like this, and they will imagine as if it's in their arms, in their hands, but they forget to do the weight of it, which he did. He came with this blue thing. He uses all of the senses again to create that imaginary blue thing in which the guns could have been, since the guns were never found. Sensory experiences in the moment, as if it's happening right now. He's becoming the character Alex Murdaugh, carrying those guns in the blue thing. He's becoming the character Miss Shelley. He's talking to Baba, the dog, Baba. He's doing all of it. He's showing us the driveway. He's looking as if the driveway to the house when Alex goes. Every little thing that he talks about, every small thing that he talks about, small, big, he is experiencing it in the moment. That's what's called sensory experiences that you do in order to make the audience, the jurors, believe you. Whew. Intense. I didn't think it was going to be so intense. Love it. Who would do that when they find their loved ones butchered in the way that they were butchered? Who would need a lawyer? You wouldn't even think. And then you say that you were afraid of the law enforcement and you just wanted to protect yourself because you didn't trust them. You were having a badge. You were the law enforcement, and your family from generations to generations were the law enforcement. So he's telling of the story that he was afraid because he didn't trust the law enforcers. But the law enforcers were the one that were actually consoling him. So it doesn't make sense. Script analysis of a character is, yes, what the character does, what the character says, but as in real life, characters can be honest and they can be dishonest. They can be both and everything in between. So another important thing we are being told in acting is what other characters say about your character. What others say about you is sometimes more insightful to analyze a character. And this is exactly what that was. He goes back to Miss Shelley, and then he talks about Blanca, who was also another manager of the property. She was also very good friends, personal friends with Maggie, the wife who got butchered, who Alex killed. Well, we know the verdict now, so he's guilty of it. He was found guilty of it. Oh, and he's also talking about Maggie's sister, Mary, when she came to testify. And that moved me to pieces too, because she was so real in testifying. She wasn't trying to come up with a version of the story that she didn't know. She just spoke honestly. You could just tell because she wasn't trying to be on any side. She was just revealing her interactions with her sister, the love that she had for her sister, and her guilt for having had a conversation with her on the phone when Maggie called her and told her that Alex wanted her to come over to the property where she ends up being killed. She felt regret because she felt that she suggested that she should go, because Alex was telling Maggie that due to his parents not doing well, Mary, Maggie's sister, encouraged her sister to go and be with Alex because Alex asked for her to come home that night. He still lies about that. His defense side lies about that, saying that it's not true. Maggie wanted to come home. So to have those descriptions of the regret that the sister is feeling for having suggested that her sister Maggie should go home to be murdered, And then to feel like, oh, if only I didn't say that. I can't even imagine living with that regret. So making a point about those personal interactions between two sisters. And then he also talks about, I believe, his siblings, if I'm not mistaken. Again, personalization, understanding, creating, experiencing. Going back to the opening, you know how to be jurors because you are human beings who have life experiences that you've all learned from. Please put them in use in the analysis of this case. I think you guys get the understanding of what I'm trying to say about these amazing tools that he's using, that he has at his fingertips, acting tips at fingertips. They're trying to bring experts to say one thing when all experts, to wake up the jury. His volume in his voice intensifies. His strength in his voice, the different register in his voice with which he goes about to make a point in the middle of the sentence. He grabs the phone and he's trying to tell us that the phone was not in his hands. It had nothing to do with him when experts testified otherwise. What are you going to believe? Use your common sense. Use your common sense. Use your common sense because you're smart. Don't let him fool you another time. Stop him. Whew. Oh, another thing, he's using Alex's own words against him. All of the interviews that were filmed, he thought that he was cunning the same way that he was cunning everybody before, playing the role of his life. Now you can say he was playing the role of his life because he was playing badly. But when you associate playing greatly the same way that this prosecutor, Mr. John Meadors, is doing it, when you associate him with theatrics in the way that most people understand theatrics to be fake, dishonest, that's when I get upset. I get upset because that's not the truth. That's the misconception of what great acting is, which is demanding of you to be honest, involved, fully, your body, soul, mind, which he's doing. Whew. The son, Paul, from the grave, from the other side, said, no, here's the video. That's where my creative mind is taking me. But again, he goes back to the deception and he goes back to say, see how the circumstantial evidence, at first it may be something that you can't really reach, you can't really touch, you can't really hear, you can't really smell, you can't really see, but it becomes so clear that it becomes direct evidence. Then you can reach it, you can see it, you can smell it, you can taste it, you can feel it. That's what he's saying. That's the importance of sensory work. Real, which you're dealing with right now. There's a table in front of me, there's a computer in front of me, I'm watching. This prosecutor got the guilty verdict. That's what I thought. That's reality. That's what I'm doing. But at the same time, if I'm going to tell you the story the same way that he's telling you the story, when I was telling you about my grandmother when I was a child, and I was living in this little town, Transylvania, there were hills in the back of the house, and those hills in the back of the house, you could see from the new house, balconies, first floor and the second floor. And from those balconies, you can see the hills. At the top of the hills, there's a beautiful lake. You can see the hay that was gathered, the land in the back of the house. And we would try to gather the hay and put it on huge piles. And then as kids, we would get on top of those piles of hay, and the smell of it now comes to me and I can actually smell it. By smelling it, I'm involving my senses and it's taking me back there right now as if I was the little girl playing before I became an adult, before I knew what was going to happen after, before my grandmother passed, before I moved to the States, before. Visual I started with, and then the sense of smell takes me back there. That's what he's doing, creating sensory experiences for himself, incorporating all of the details of the case. So then the jurors can experience themselves those sensory experiences as if they were happening to them through him. That's what great actors do. I did not even know, I don't remember this segment of the closing where he's actually saying that Paul testified. Imaginative argument to say Paul did testify. He took that video. And then he goes to say about Maggie the same thing. And she testified by saying, look at these gun shells. They're the same as the other ones used on the property. So they have to come from the same guns that are owned by Alex Murdaugh. For him to bring their voices, to bring them back to life through his closing argument, to give them that voice to say they had so much to do with solving and bringing this monster to justice. These two people who love this person probably were so shocked to see in their last minutes on this earth. It's so powerful. It's so tragic. Participants in solving their own murder, pointing to the husband, father, to be the monster that he is. The fact that he brought that up, it's such an acting tool, going to make people emotionalized. I'm having tears in my eyes, and I saw this before, and now I'm seeing some new things that he's talking about, and I didn't even know. Do you see how Alex Murdaugh, even though he's explaining all of the situations so much more sensorially, so much more palpable, he's not crying anymore. He's not crying anymore because he thinks that by this time, he doesn't have to play his bad act, that he's conning everybody for another time. One more time. That's what he believes. The jury, after that last closing argument, which was the last act they saw before they got to go to deliberate, they came back after only 3 hours, unanimously found Alex Murdaugh guilty. Can you believe that? This gentleman, I believe, has so much to do in getting the verdict, because I didn't even realize the first time I watched this, but now that I had to sit and listen to it so I can analyze it, so you can understand how he was giving us a performance of deserving an Oscar, because he was so great at experiencing everything and everyone that he was talking about, giving the jurors, the audience, the same understanding so they can experience it themselves. I think due to him, the verdict came back so soon, only after 3 hours, unanimously. Mwah, mwah, mwah.